listeners to Podcast Evolved, your favorite Halo podcast. I am your host, Krista. Thank you, no applause necessary. And with me today is Aaron.
Hi, guys.
And Oren.
Hey, everyone.
And it's Lore Week! Yay!
Yippee!
For this week's lore, we will cover Forerunner Artifacts. Ooh, ah. But before we get started, be sure to check out our awesome website if you haven't, halopodcast.com or halopodcastevolved.com. It takes you to the same place. We also have a wonderful Patreon page, and that is patreon.com/halopodcastevolved, where we offer a variety of rewards for patrons and subscribers, as well as early access to the show. Ooh, yay! We would like to take this moment to thank our current patrons for their support. Thank you very much. We appreciate it so much, especially with everything that's going on. We really appreciate everything you guys do for us.
Yes, thank you immensely, especially during the present time.
Yeah, with all the craziness going on.
Yeah, it's good to know people will continue to be generous in the face of the apocalypse. Fills me with hope.
Lore Week, Road to Infinite. Before we tackle this week's topic, last week's topic was artificial intelligences. Ooh, so we talked about human AIs and the difference between smart and dumb AIs. We talked about notable AIs over the years and which ones are more likely to, to see what's gonna happen with them. Some speculation, fun stuff like that. We talked about the Forerunners Archeon? Archeon. This is the problem with me not listening to the
audiobooks.
I have no idea how to pronounce anything. Forerunners Archeon classes and contender class AIs, or Ancillas, and other constructs. And the Covenant's disapproval of AI, because there's always one buzzkill in the group.
Yeah.
And so for this this episode's lore topic, we are talking about Forerunner Artifacts. There's a lot to talk about. Do you want to introduce us to Forerunner Artifacts, Oren?
Yeah, I can introduce us. So, Forerunner Artifacts is a huge topic. I'm going to kind of talk about a little bit about the Covenant, kind of why Forerunner Artifacts are sought after, then talk about how they located artifacts that then kind of started the whole Human Covenant War, and so on and so forth. And then we'll kind of wrap up the topic talking about our personal favorite artifacts throughout the Halo universe, and then, maybe some fun speculation stuff about Infinite. So the Covenant, of course, is all based on like the Sanshayun and their religion of trying to reach godlike status of the Forerunners. And to do that, they go on the Great Journey. And to help them to go on this great journey is they find Forerunner artifacts throughout the galaxy to seek enlightenment. They first started all this when the Dreadnought crash landed on their homeworld, and that's what repopulated the Sanshayun as part of the conservation method. This started a Sanshayun civil war over should we follow the Forerunner, should we not, sort of a thing. And after, I think it was only like 8 years, the Sanshayun eventually just adopted the Forerunners as the caretakers and their gods that they need to follow. So then that's when they started planet hopping around the galaxy, and they go to Sanghelios, where they find a whole bunch of Forerunner artifacts there, because in the Dreadnought, there's this device called a luminary, which I'll kind of discuss in a little bit, but that basically scans the universe or the galaxy for any artifacts. So they stumble upon Sanghelios, they find the Sangheli, have a conversation, and the Sangheli are aware of all these Forerunner artifacts, including a Guardian. They know that it's there, but they're more reverent about it. They're more, don't interfere with it. But the Sanshayun say, no, we need to dissect it. We need to learn more about it so then we can become like these Forerunner beings. So then that launched a war between the two. And the Sangheli were kind of at a disadvantage because the Sanshayun kept using the technology of the Forerunners to outclass the Sangheli, until eventually the Sangheli gave in. They started using the Forerunner technology, and then eventually they were kind of at a standstill until they eventually decided, okay, let's reach peace, we'll join the Covenant, we'll protect you, and we'll go on this great journey with you. And that's where they use, again, these luminaries and other sort of artifacts, and that's where they find the planet Harvest, and that is First Contact. We have the Human and Covenant War, which then eventually leads to the downfall of the Covenant. Luminaries, they're Forerunner devices that scan limited space to find and identify locations of Forerunner relics and artifacts. And there's only a handful of Forerunner luminaries out there, because the Covenant then reverse engineered their own luminaries, so then they can continue to scan for relics throughout the galaxy. Kind of like how every human ship has to activate the Quo protocol to kind of escape the Covenant in case the ship is threatened to be captured. Every Covenant vessel has a luminary to then, as they're going through space, they're able to locate any of these artifacts that they find. And the real luminaries, the actual Forerunner luminaries, tend to be a little bit more exact, or sometimes pinpoint exactly to a very specific artifact. So, for instance, the luminary that was found and discovered on the planet Meridian, it showed the exact location of where the Ark in Installation 00 is located, as well as the portal that leads to it. And so when the Covenant invaded Meridian and found this luminary, they didn't go and travel to Earth because they knew that was the humans' homeworld. They traveled to Earth because that's where the portal was, so then they can go to the Ark, where they really wanted to go to activate the Great Journey. And then something else that we talked about in a recent book club is the Janus Key that was in Halo Escalation. And the Janus Key is a cartographical artifact that reveals the location of all Forerunner artifacts inside the galaxy. So it's basically a super duper luminary. And so this is what Halsey really wanted to discover, because she, like the Covenant, wanted to find these artifacts for these technological advances as opposed to more religious advances. And so those are kind of the two artifacts that help locate these around the galaxy. And so to kind of touch on a few artifacts that we know of throughout the Halo lore, and if there's anything we want to kind of say about it before we dive into our personal favorites. But of course, the rings are installations. They're considered artifacts, and we talked about the Halo array in our first episode. Each ring has their own monitor, or what the Covenant call oracles. We'll talk about those in a future episode. There's the Sigma Octanus 4 artifact, and this is just a crystallized object that had a star chart embedded into it. And then that eventually, once you decrypt that star chart, that you learn the destination of Installation 04. And so we learned about that in Halo Reach. Again, with the rings, you have an activation index that is basically the key to using the Halo's ultimate weapon. Something that we'll get to in a little bit, the Minachite Forerunner Crystal, or just called the Forerunner Crystal. This is in First Strike, so we'll touch a little bit on it in our book club later next month. But it basically has strange energy properties, like warping slip space and different energy and gravity distortions and things like that. All the terminals that you interact with in Halo 2, or really Halo 3 and Halo 4, those are considered artifacts, and they're interfaces that database knowledge and past experiences from whoever created the file, so to speak, created the information. And then, like I mentioned before, the Dreadnought, it's the huge kind of spaceship that Chief flies from Halo 2 to get back to Earth. So that Dreadnought is really the power source of the Covenant's high charity. And that's where the Sanct-Chayun really learned everything about the Forerunners that they know. And so it's a Forerunner key ship. So yeah, so the Covenant goes around and looks for these artifacts throughout the galaxy, and different artifacts have different properties that kind of influence the story that we learn about them in each one. And so we'll kind of touch in individually now of kind of what our favorite ones are and kind of how it influences the story that we have, and like with the medium that they're in, and then kind of how we think it might relate to Infinite, or at least, what are some good speculation that we have. So, Aaron, do you want to kind of touch on one of your favorite artifact is?
It was really hard to pick. I was kind of torn between the composer. I've now forgotten the name of it, what they call it in Halo, but like the catalog with Born Stellar's like story on it.
Oh, the juridicials?
Yeah, the juridical. There's a name for that like file or story.
Catalog?
No, they call it something like the Born Stellar.
Oh, the
In
Born Stellar
universe.
Archive or the Born Stellar. Yeah, I know what you're talking. It's literally just the primordial books.
Yes, it's that whole book. Just they have it in text form, but I decided in the end to go with the composer because I think, like we were talking about at the end, if it's going to have a relevance to Infinite, I think the composer's more likely. And I've decided I'm not talking about Mendiga Bias anymore because he's never going to fucking appear.
Oh,
You say that and he's going to come back.
If he does, I'll be surprised, but I think there's more chance of this. I think we've touched on the composer before.
I think briefly.
Yeah, I think we did it with the Forerunner stuff back in the day, like we've touched on it a few times. The Forerunners built the composer. It's basically a giant scanner, and it can turn sentient life forms into data. So you scan a being, you turn it into a file. You can retain most of its information. I think you can do all of it depending on how it's used. Originally, it was designed so that old Forerunners could be digitized and then downloaded into younger bodies, or you could be digitized and uploaded to the domain. That was the original purpose, was just like they could add the sum of your life's knowledge to the domain and you could like kind of live on. It's a weird way of getting to Forerunner heaven. It was a bit of an unusual one.
Digital heaven.
Yeah, digital heaven. And then that was kind of all right for a long time, and then a certain arsehole called the Master Builder decided that he would try to use the composer to cure flood victims, which, to be fair, was a reasonably good intentioned goal, but it never worked because it turns out when you digitize a flood infected victim and strip out the flood infection and then put them into a new body, the flood infection comes back.
Oh.
There you go.
How convenient.
It's a horrible thing. So it never actually worked in that. Also, it's incredibly painful to be digitized by the composer, as seen in Halo 4, when that doctor screamed and died and was stripped apart one piece after another. It has a nasty, like, it almost dissects your body. I think in Halopedia they said specifically it like flays the body layer by layer, so like skin, muscle, the whole lot down to the bone.
That doesn't sound fun at all. Wow, that's an awful way to get
Sounds
to heaven.
painful.
Death would probably be better.
I think a lot of things would be better than that. So you had that. The librarian was kind of the next person to put the composer to use. So she used it after the Battle of Charam Hakor to digitize the last of the ancient humans. So we got the Lord of Admirals and a few other people. And she was able to take those digitized files and build them into her DNA. And they actually live on as personalities. So they can't be put back into a body because that never works. They never figured that out. But you can do things with the digitized file. You can make an AI out of them, as happened with some people. Or you can embed them in human DNA and then activate them later on to be like a weird AI that lives in your brain.
How wonderful.
Yeah, not necessarily a big fan of that. A lot of stuff that the Forerunners do, I'm not a big fan of.
They do some crazy ass shit.
They do. It gets worse. So we then had the Didact. If you remember from our Forerunner talk, there is the Didact and the Isodidact. The Didact, or I call him is the crazy guy from Halo 4. He doesn't like humans very much. He eventually lost the plot as the Flood War went on, and one of the last acts he did was he used the composers to convert all of his Promethean warriors into robots. So they became the Knights, and the plan was to use those to fight the Flood because they can't be infected, because they're no longer biological. He also didn't have enough, so he turned the composer on humans, and turns out they make a pretty good army of Prometheans.
How wonderful. What a nice guy.
Yeah, that was his downfall. He composed a load of humans, pissed his wife off, and she locked him away then.
I mean, that's bound to happen if you're doing shit like that.
To be fair, yeah, I think like she made the right call on that one. That was kind of the last use of the composer for a long time, and then it cropped up again in Halo 4. It turns out the UNSC found a composer on, I believe, Installation 3.
Yeah.
Yes.
And they moved it for study Eventually, the didact would reappear and he would take said composer and he composed New Phoenix, as well as all the poor people in that station. And we know how Halo 4 went. In the end, Mantle's approach was destroyed, along with the composer, except it turns out there were more composers. Which installation was this on?
It was still on 3. I think the stockpile was all on 3.
No, I think there was a portal on 3, wasn't there? And like the composer's whatever forge is like somewhere different. Because they go through portals a bunch.
No, I think maybe there were more through that portal.
Is it the Well of... I think there's like the Well of Sorrows or something, which is where the composed people were beamed to. That's where the portal went. So when you're on Mantle's approach and you look down and see the slipspace portal, that beamed back to the composer's forge, and then they stored them there on hard drives.
It looked like a bunch of zombies.
It was that wailing tunnel. It kind of looked like the tunnel out of Event Horizon, except instead of vicious spiky teeth, it's like composed humans.
How wonderful.
I know, everything in the Forerunners is fantastic and great.
These guys sound awesome. I'm so sad that they're not around anymore to do stuff like this.
It turned out there were quite a few composers there. And fun fact, you can be immune to the composer. Master Chief is immune to the composer. The didact was also immune to the composer. But during the events in Escalation, Master Chief dropped a control room on the didact and threw him into the composer's forge at great speed, and he was somehow composed by the composers there. The best running theory is that there were just enough of them, although I think the didact might have had the ability to like switch it on and off and allow himself to be composed.
In order to just live?
To be evil.
Yes, so in theory the didact lives on as a digital form, potentially as a robotic form, which is why I mentioned the composer and why I like it, because as artifacts go, it might have the most relevance for Halo Infinite, because a certain pretty good evil character could still exist in the universe.
The didact was a great evil character.
So when the didact was composed by the composer, he got basically beamed to the domain. He's not in the composer because wasn't all the composers destroyed?
He'd be in like that well, but I assume if anyone would have the ability to transfer themselves, it would be a Forerunner. I'd imagine they have more control over that system than, or at the very least, if it was discovered, a certain bunch of AIs might make use of him. I don't know if it's the sort of thing Cortana would do, but I'd imagine the didact of all people would have a way out of that.
Okay. Because Blue Team and them destroyed the composer's forge.
I don't know, you see. This is the thing. I'm not sure if they've destroyed the forge because Halos have a nasty habit of repairing themselves. So I could very easily see the forge existing again and composers existing again. They dropped the control room on the forge, but it obviously didn't destroy the forge completely because the composers were able to compose the didact. So something had to have survived, which makes me think that there's still a possibility.
And also this was all in a comic, which means everything is very up for interpretation depending on how you read the comic.
Yeah, for a long time I just assumed the didact died in a fiery ball of death. And then a few people started to point out and go, no, that's like composer. It's not death, it's like he's being composed, which made a little more sense. I wouldn't mind seeing the didact come back.
I like him, he's a pretty cool character.
Fantastic voice actor.
Oh, amazing. I love it. All of his writing's really good too. Everything he says is just so interesting. His
whole monologue at the end of Halo 4, when he's addressing, I don't know who.
When it's doing the end roll, yeah. Yep. The Forerunners have returned.
So that was my artifact, is that I don't think the composers are gone, and if the composers aren't gone, then there's a didact somewhere.
Hooray!
He's now digital didact, so that's even worse.
Digidact.
There you go.
He's now created.
Oh, I mean, yeah, he could just make himself into an AI.
See?
Yeah, I would just wonder where he was during Halo 5 then. But I'm sure we would get that answer.
He was busy making himself into an AI.
There you go.
Shit doesn't happen right away.
Yeah, he was waiting on the file transfer.
Yeah, he didn't have a hardwire connection. He was only wireless.
Yeah, you've got to do it in Wi-Fi, and that takes a while, you know.
Light years, you know.
Silly me.
Slow connection. Cortana's using a lot of it. Like, you've got to tell her to turn off Netflix, and
She has Netflix on every tablet to try to stop him. What a heroic way to stop a villain.
Right, who we got next?
Me! Okay, I am talking about shield worlds and Dyson spheres. Yay! So shield worlds and Dyson spheres are obviously very, very interesting. They've kind of cropped up a couple times in the Halo universe, just one or two. There might be a couple around. They're just super interesting because they are an alternative to the Halo installations. The Forerunners always described it as like, Halo was the sword and the shield worlds was the shield.
There you go. Look what you did there.
I know, right? No, I mean, people have been saying that. That's not, I didn't come up with that. Sorry to burst your bubble. But the shield worlds were basically supposed to be defensive action against the Flood instead of the Halos being an offensive action. So the shield worlds were supposed to provide a safe refuge from the Flood. People could go, basically the entire Forerunner populace would evacuate to all these shield worlds once the Flood infection got really bad. And they would just live there and keep going about their lives. And of course, there would be a bunch of powerful military bases. And basically, the military forces would go out and campaign against the Flood while everyone's in these shield worlds, so the Flood can't infect more of them. It was a longer, path to getting rid of the Flood than the Halos, but it affects the universe a lot less.
It was a pretty good plan.
It was a really good plan, but then the master builder came along and he's like, nah, man, I got these Halos and I don't like your plan, and I also don't like your face. Because the Didact, before he went crazy, was very interested in these shield worlds and was starting to make it into a big plan like the Halos, and Master Builder did not like the plan, and there was a bunch of political stuff, and so the shield worlds never became a thing, which is why we don't really find a bunch of Forerunners when we go into a shield world. They're all completely abandoned, but they're all completely stocked with stuff like they're supposed to be supporting a civilization. So the shield worlds actually vastly outnumber Halo installations because in this plan, over 1,000 were originally planned to be in it. Now, at least 673 have been constructed, which means there's 673 shield worlds out there that we can go explore and have fun in. And hopefully there's no Flood in them.
Yeah, that'd be a backfire.
There's one or two less. We may have killed some along the way.
We have. We've definitely destroyed a couple along the way, unfortunately. So, some of the types of shield worlds, there's about 3 different types. So there's the initial design type, which was just kind of the rough draft. It's some of the earlier shield worlds are actually made in this. So it is an armored outer shell. The interior of the outer shell is completely mechanized and produces light and energy and stuff like that. And then inside the shell is another sphere. And the surface of that sphere is terrestrial. So it has a bunch of Earth-like properties to it, plants, stuff like that. It's the livable space. And so inside the second sphere is the hollowed out core of the shield world, which is inverted. So it's the inverted space. It's basically a ball and then a ball inside, and then inside that ball is another ball, but the surface is on the inside of that ball. So that is the initial design, and that one is what Requiem is. When we go on Requiem, if you remember going into the core of the surface, we are in an inverted plane. We're not on a sphere, we're in the inside of the sphere when we go inside of Requiem. So the next one is the Conservation Sphere, and the Conservation was designed by the librarian, who of course wanted to conserve life, and which is why the Halos have the terrestrial inside of them. So she came up with this design. So it's an artificial planetary surface that encapsulates a miniature Dyson sphere. A Dyson sphere is a megastructure that completely encompasses a star or artificial star and captures a large percentage of its power output. So this miniature Dyson sphere now has the surface inside, so it's the surface is on the inside of the sphere. And so there are portals to get in and out of the structure. The interior has a vast terraformed surface and a miniature star in the middle of it. So this one specifically provides safety from the firing of the Halos, and then has a bunch of weapon caches and stuff like that. So this one is the one that we see in Halo Wars. The original Halo Wars is a conservation sphere. Now we get to the really fun one. We have the Micro Dyson Sphere. And Micro is a funny name for it because it is definitely not micro.
Yeah.
This one is a Dyson sphere that is located within a in a bubble of compressed slipstream space. So it's a very minuscule, probably size of a basketball. And so the only entrance to this space is a small portal within the core of an artificial planet. And then the access is only upon imminent activation of the Halo array. So these are actually huge because they're in compressed slipstream space, and then a planet is built around these compressed spaces. So when you go through the portal, you actually end up in a space that's literally 300 kilometers in diameter. It is completely huge. It features vast terraformed surfaces, artificial star in the middle, and sometimes they even have planets orbiting the artificial star. It's literally
like a mini solar system of sorts?
Yeah, so once if the compressed bubble of slipstream space is completely brought back into normal space, it literally just engulfs an entire solar system.
Yeah, that's I think that's what they have with Trevelyan. It's so big that when it comes out, it swallows the 3 planets and it parks on the surface of the sun and uses the solar system's sun for fuel.
Yes. And so before that, it was just there was still an artificial sun in the middle, but it was just in condensed space. And so when it is brought back into normal space, it literally just swallows the entire solar system, which is absolutely insane. The Micro Dyson spheres are probably the best ones because they are the most secure. They're secure from the firing of the halos and that effect, and they're also secure from normal space because the only way you can get in is to basically fight your way past a bunch of Forerunner structures to the inside of a planet, and then try to access the portal, which is not very easy. And of course, these ones only activate when the Halo array is going to be activated. So this one was definitely the super shit's going down bunker.
They're like the emergency lifeboat bunker.
And they're huge, so they can fit a lot of people in them. So let's go over some known shield worlds, because we know a couple of them. Our first one is Shield World 001, which is Requiem, if you remember from Halo 4. We went on that one, we kind of saw it. It's like I said, it's that first one I mentioned. It is the initial design, so it's literally a planet within a planet setup. And of course, that one got thrown into the sun, so we don't have that one anymore.
That one's kind of gone.
The next one is Shield World 006, which is Sarcophagus or Trevelyan, which is our Micro Dyson Sphere, the giant one, huge. So that is right now taken over by Oni and the Swords of Sanghelios, and there are some people inside it. We don't know what's going on with them. We've kind of had a blackout with all the technology and stuff, but people are living inside of Trevelyan, and that's kind of a huge locked down base. The next one is Shield World 0459, which is Etran Harborage, which is the Shield World from Halo Wars, which is the conservation sphere. It housed a huge Forerunner fleet that they were trying to use against us, and that one got blown up. So Forge blew that one up, so we don't have that one anymore. The next one is Shield World 0673, which is the Refuge, which is from Broken Circle. This shield world is supposedly one of the last shield worlds constructed, and it has an interesting ability to break the outer shell of the shield world if the interior is compromised. So I believe it's one of the initial design ones, so it's a planet within a planet, and then the outer surface of the planet can be broken away. It was used by some Covenant rebels a while back. And I don't think we know what's going on with the Refuge, do we?
It is currently in a ring shape, and it's back in touch with the Sangheli homeworld. So it was, I think they say in the book, it was the most advanced shield world ever created, because its defense mechanism was it could fake its own death.
Oh.
Wow.
It explodes apart into chunks, which is what happened during Broken Circle. It explodes apart into these sections that drift around an asteroid field and blend in with everything else. And then, in theory, it reassembles later on to form a large ring space station.
Oh. So it kind of can pretend to be dead and then reform itself to still be an active facility.
The theory was that the flood would attack, it would look like the Forerunners committed suicide, and then you would wait till the flood moved on, and then you could reassemble the ring. It's kind of it's a one-time trick.
That's interesting. And of course it never got to be used for its originally intended purpose, because the flood isn't around when it's being used.
Yeah, I think the rebels on the station fake their death from the Covenant. That's why the station separated into the pieces, and then the Monitor, I think, took like a micro asteroid to the brain, and then wasn't able to reassemble it for thousands of years.
Interesting. So our final shield world we're going to go over is Shield 10021. This one is actually the juridical. Is it juridical?
Juridical.
Okay, juridical archive. This is from Halo Warfleet, actually. It's located in the Orion arm of the Milky Way, and it contains the entire archives collected by the juridical rate. So that one is just a huge cache of information that we haven't really found yet. It was just mentioned very briefly in Halo Warfleet because there's very little on it, but it's one of the ones we know of as, I guess not in the universe, but I guess as these omniscient beings that look at all the information that we are.
Does the Forerunner homeworld, or like the capital city, Mithrilian, does it count as a shield world?
No, it's a completely artificial city. I don't think it's considered a world. It's probably huge enough to be a world, but it's not spherical.
It folds up into a sphere. That's all that made me wonder.
Oh, when I was researching, shield worlds and stuff like that, it never came up as listed under anything. It might be just something that's...
It's more like an installation, like the Ark, then.
Yeah, I would say so. It's probably something. It's also completely unique. There's a bunch of shield worlds.
That's very true. I like shield worlds.
I like shield worlds too. I think they're really interesting. I think they're a little more diverse than the Halos, which is nice, because we only have so many Halos, and the Halos are pretty much, they're the rings, So there's so many of them, so they can pop up at any point. Literally, you could be living on a planet and not even know it's a shield world, which is great. So that's about it for shield worlds and Dyson spheres. Orin?
I do want to shout out, if you want to know more about shield worlds and specifically Trevelyan, the not the opening chapter, but pretty much the first hour read of Legacy of Onyx talks about, it's a bunch of scientists asking about what a shield world is, and then the other character is just explaining it. It's one of the most interesting parts of that whole book, and it really puts into perspective of what the UNSC knows about shield worlds and how they're utilizing it for their current sort of research and stuff like that. So definitely check that book out.
I think it's in that book, don't they say it's the equivalent of a couple of million surfaces of the Earth for Trevelyan? And
yes.
It would take that long to survey the whole thing.
Yeah, you can live in one part of Trevelyan and not even interact with anybody from another part because it's just so vast of a space.
And then not to mention the planets inside it. Just that breaks my brain.
Legacy of Onyx does a really, the best one to read about, the origins and finding Trevelyan is definitely Ghosts of Onyx, but Legacy of Onyx does a really good job at kind of bringing everything into perspective and what it is and, how vast it is, because it's kind of hard to imagine sometimes.
I think that, and if you were Ghosts of Onyx, Glasslands, and Legacy, you get the full shield world Dyson sphere setup.
Yeah. Those books do the best job at kind of talking about what Dyson spheres are and what shield worlds are and all that fun information.
All that good stuff.
Yeah, even getting to see it in Halo Wars was pretty cool.
Yes, very cool.
I think that's one of the best cutscenes in the game. I don't know if you've got that far yet, is when you enter the shield world and the spirit of fire comes up out of the ground past the pine trees and flies up into space.
And then Serena's freaking out. She's like, we're inside a planet. What the hell's going on?
I can't blame Serena. She's a big girl in that ship. She doesn't expect to be inside planets.
So I'll wrap things up. with the vertex, which is a pretty unique artifact that isn't really in any other medium except for the one book that it was in, and we really don't have anything else like it. And what it is that it's a helmet that has a central neural interface that to connect to the host that wears it. And when wearing this helmet, you control genetically enhanced animal race called the Shirokoi. And the reason that it's not, specific to them, it's because the Shirokoi, the Forerunner, put like collars around their neck and did some other genetic modifications to then communicate with the vertex, so then you can control them in this like collective mind type of connectivity. And the reason that the Forerunners did this is because the Shirokoi showed a strong resiliency against the flood, and so they were used in mass to fight the flood and kind of control them, since they couldn't really, the Shirokoi couldn't get infected. And so you had essentially armies and armies of Shirokoi throughout the galaxy. And in this one instance, there's this sort of stockpile, if you were just on this planet Caro, that they weren't in like cryo sleep or anything. How were they I forget.
I think they were in stasis.
They were in some form of stasis to kind of allow them to continue to be living, but be able to be there for thousands and thousands of years. And so this all goes back to this Jiralane chieftain called Hecube, who discovered the vertex on the Ark when all the brutes and other Covenant forces went to the Ark after the Battle of Earth in hopes of activating the Halo array. And so he heard about this device and sought after it and eventually found it, and then defected from the Covenant on the Ark with his sort of loyal troops. And they went on this expedition to find the Shirokoi that this vertex controlled. It took them like 8 years to do it, and eventually found the location. It was on this planet called Caro. And in the midst of all this, by this time, since it's been years after that, it's post the Human Covenant War, and so there's some still post-war tension between humans and Covenant who are present on Caro, and so that kind of makes a three-way sort of interesting dynamic when you read the book and all that. But specifically for the vertex, Hecube puts the helmet on and starts controlling these Shirokoi, and it's his hope to, take over the planet and kind of create his own reign of power utilizing this device, which eventually kind of leads to his downfall and stuff like that. But what's also interesting about this device is that it saves like an imprint of previous hosts' brains within it. So when Hecube puts the helmet on, not only is he using his own malicious sort of thoughts and motives to control the Shirokoi, but he's also getting influence from the past hosts that have just been living inside the vertex, and kind of consuming and almost corrupting him even more. And this is kind of expanded upon when another character puts the helmet on. It's just a very interesting and very unique device, an artifact that is being used in this novel, that I definitely can see, maybe not this specific helmet resurfacing, but very similar devices resurfacing within the Halo universe. Not specifically Infinite, but just if the Shirokoi were to come back or come into a game, because it originally was planned to be in Halo 2, but then was cut. And so if it does kind of come back, then it can create a different dynamic, or if similar devices to kind of control a collective of individuals or animals or something, that implementation can be very kind of interesting, since the Flood is kind of the go-to collective mind entity in Halo, and to kind of bring a different version of that for different fighting style is definitely interesting. Again, that's mostly in the Halo Envoy novel. We did a book club on it, and we also interviewed the author Tobias Buckle, who also did the Cold Protocol novel and one of the short stories that kind of introduces the planet. And so that was episode 150 if you want to listen to that and you missed it. But yeah, I think this device is just so freaking cool. I hope there's something similar that kind of comes back to kind of almost like these mystical or mythical items and artifacts just scattered around for any sort of Covenant or ex-Covenant or human to kind of pick up and try to wield. It just kind of showcases the power of the Forerunners. So
yeah, the Shirokoi were definitely an awesome addition to to Envoy. It was quite a surprise, because once they were mentioned, it was just like, I think I remember something about these guys. So it was definitely a pleasant surprise, and the Forerunner artifact that controlled them was really well written and very, very interesting. A couple different characters get to wear it, and I just can never get the thought out of my head of because when you put the helmet on, it like bores into your skull. It's like, oh, that's awful.
It nearly sounds kind of like it soaks into your skull in like spikes. It's the most thing, because after a while they describe it as like, you can see like the silver studs of the helmet where it's soaked into the brain. You're just like, who the fuck would ever put this on? Why did the Forerunners think this was a good idea?
And just taking it off is just all equally gruesome.
I guess the Forerunners had probably some better way of putting it on, but...
Well, maybe it integrated with their armor a little bit more, like, better. So then, like, if you think about the Forerunner weapons, like, when you're using it and as you, like, reload and zoom in and stuff like that, it kind of changes around you. And so I feel like that sort of compatibility with their armor, had some benefits. And so this helmet could have similar sort of compatibility that not necessarily human, but just flesh and muscle is not as compatible.
Yeah, and I also like that the sad thing about them is they're like a peaceful sort of quiet animal, and they're not normally violent and vicious, even though they're like the most destructive creature we've ever had in Halo. They make the brutes look like puppies.
They do.
And the hunters.
Yeah, like there's no species that could stand up to them, but they're also this like relaxed, peaceful, quiet sort of animal, and the Forerunners just destroyed them.
Yeah, they just made them vicious.
I'm noticing a theme here.
Forerunners suck.
Forerunners are terrible.
They're cool, but they're also not.
Well, I think that's about it. I mean, we kind of touched on individually each device that we talked about and how we kind of hope it comes back. I hope a similar device kind of comes back. Chris, we have Dyson spheres all over the universe, and there's always a threat of a ring being fired. We're going to be on Installation 07 in Infinite, so there's definitely something with the Shield Ward's impact. Also, at the end there's a Guardian on Trevelyan, and so there's maybe some developments there that we see, and kind of how Shield Words can be combative against the Guardians. And then with the Composer, if there are any still around from the Forge, or some that the Forge is rebuilding, and then by extension the Diadact kind of potentially coming back in some sort of created digital form. Definitely a lot of potential that could kind of come out. Anything else you guys want to talk about on the topic?
I think we pretty much covered everything.
Yeah, I think I'm pretty good for this for now. I'll be disappointed. We'll get no Didact, so it won't matter.
Aww.
All right. Well, our next episode for The Road for Infinite, 2 weeks from this recording, will be What's Left of the Covenant, or the Covenant Remnants. Because, of course, at the end of the Human Covenant War, at the beginning of 2553, the Covenant, for lack of a better word, just disbands. But between, almost the 10 years of the Covenant disbanding and when Infinite begins, there's still plenty of factions still around, different individuals that still believe in the Great Journey, others who just want the power and still have the animosity towards the human race. So we're going to kind of touch on different leaders and kind of see where these Revenant factions are, as well as where they have been since essentially the end of Halo 3.
Good stuff. Thank you for joining us. Please visit our website, halopodcastevolved.com, for the latest episodes, Halo release schedules, links to our Discord, Facebook, and Xbox Live communities. I have been your host, Krista. Until next time, evolve.
Evolved.